The sun was sinking like a patriarch to rest, its parting rays were glinting o'er the woodlands of the west. An eve of springtime glory mantles o'er each hill and glen, where rebels died for Ireland in thy sylvan shades, Loch Lynn. Now, folks, we're here tonight, first and foremost. It is my sad duty to convey my own, the society's, and each and every one of you here tonight, a sad condolence to the Loughnane family on the passing of our good friend Ronan, who was so talented and so generous with his time and talents. His loss is immeasurably, most of all to his wife Annette, his mother Anne, and his children. So sincere condolences to each and every one of them. Ladies and gentlemen, Father Jerry and all our friends here will start off tonight with something extremely topical. We're right on the button, right on the money, something that was just launched over the weekend. We're here tonight to talk about it. Everyone has an unbelievable interest. This relates to our own people. Looking around, a lot of our fathers and mothers, certainly our grandparents. So who other than Dr. Noreen Higgins to stand up and take us through that. Dr. Noreen, a renowned historian and author and teacher and researcher. So it is my great pleasure now to hand you over to the capable hands of Noreen. Thank you very much.
So, good afternoon everybody. I'm going to raise my voice rather than use a microphone. Can anyone not hear me? Right, if you can't hear me, will you put your hand up during the lecture? And if I can't hear me, then I'll use the microphone. But at the moment, I'm not going to. So thank you very much, Michael, for that introduction. I've been doing genealogy for over 35 years now. I started when I was a teenager. I did all my own history, all my own genealogy of my own family. Then I got into the clan rallies, which I did in the 1990s. Then I wrote a book about pre-famine Ireland, which was a wonderful topic, and ended up doing an MA and PhD on that. And then in 2018 I wrote a book which is called Tracing Your Family Tree, or Tracing Your Tipperary Ancestors, and I have some here for sale if some people want them. It doesn't include the 2026 census because it was published in 2018. It's for €15 if anybody wants it. And second of all then, about a year and a half ago, I did a book on Cumann, which is called Revolutionary Women of Tipperary, 1914 to 1923. So this actually is very much a genealogy book as well. I can't seem to get away from genealogy because it goes through the nominal rolls and lists all the women and gives all their biographies and their medals and so on, if anyone wants that, and that's €35, and it also includes part of Limerick. So I'll talk about that later on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to discuss the 1926 census. I will do all the talking, and then I'll take questions afterwards. So if there's any part you don't understand, we'll leave it till after the end, if that's okay. Is that alright? So, in my own mind I kind of wondered what all the fuss was about the 1926 census, but I am beginning to kind of realise what the fuss is. So this is a still from an exhibition which is going to be held on the 1926 census. It's been in the news quite a lot, particularly over the weekend. I got major coverage in all the newspapers and on the television, and there's going to be quite a number of events around the country and in Dublin about the 1926 census. And this is kind of what the National Archives of Ireland is based in Dublin. They have indexed it and they've digitalised it, and this is the picture they have shown to show the 1926 census, people from that particular era. Now, the launch of the census happened on the 18th of April at Dublin Castle. And at the launch, it was launched by Taoiseach Micheál Martin, who's in the middle there, the Minister for Culture, Communications and Sport, Patrick O'Donovan, and then the Director of the National Archives, Ora McBride. And the launch was held at Dublin Castle. And here they are standing in front of Archcale Féin, the story of us. Now, there is an exhibition which is going to be held on this, and I'll explain it in a few moments, by the National Archives, which is compiled by the National Archives, and it's going to be at the Coach House Gallery in Dublin Castle from the 19th of April to the 15th of August 2027. However, it's going to close for 6 months because Dublin Castle will be used by the Irish presidency for the 6 months. And while it is during those 6 months then, you will actually travel around the country, including Thurles. And I'll talk about that later on. So while this exhibition is being held, the same exhibition then is also being shown at the British Academy in London and at Boston College in Boston in the USA in April and May. Now what they also did then, the National Archives of Ireland, NAI, they also announced that they have 48 centenary ambassadors. And these were people who were born between 1920 and 1926. And they are going to, their stories are actually in part of the exhibition. That they're going back over their memories of what it was like when they were born between 1920 and 1926, what their memories of the late 1920s were in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and they're giving an insight into the story of the Irish Free State from 1926 to 2026. And also then in that exhibition then there'll be interactive videos, there'll be the documents, you'll actually see some of the original manuscripts, and it's free to go into, but it is travelling around the country. Now they also then took centenary ambassadors. So these are people again who were born between 1920 and 2026, and they wanted to represent the Irish diaspora, those people who are of Irish ancestry. And those people then are from the USA, Canada, Britain and Australia. And their personal testimony, which you can read there, will provide a living perspective on the past century of Irish life, and will also be used in the exhibition. Is that okay? Now there is worldwide interest in the census. That's why it's very important. Because about 9 to 10 million people, about 8 to 9 million people have actually immigrated from Ireland in the past 200 years. And so as a result then, there were 20 million hits on the National Archive website on its release on Saturday, between Saturday and Sunday. And 1 million people then also went into the National Archives and actually looked up the census in the first 2 days of its release. Most of the traffic is coming from Ireland, UK, USA, Australia and Canada. Because lots of people who have gone to America and all those places, they know their ancestors came from Ireland. If they're lucky, they know they came from Kings County or Queen's County, Offaly or Laois, or they came from Tipperary. And that's it. Very few are able to go down to Townland living. And very quickly, I'll just make a joke if I can. I was one time in the National Library and we were all lined up in our little queue going up to the person to give him our ticket, who would give it to another person, who would give it to another person, and then they come out with it. And this man sailed in, passed us all out, an American with a big hat on. And he put his hands on the table and he said, "I'm looking for my ancestors." And the person behind the table was a crabby little man who didn't appreciate this problem of this man suddenly coming in. And he said, "And who were your ancestors?" "They were Murphy from Cork," he says. And a man took great pleasure in telling him that Murphy was the most popular name in Ireland in the 19th century, and that most people left from Cork, from Queenstown. And you can see your man, just his face fall. He just presumed he could walk in and find out. That's not going to happen. Now, a very interesting thing about our census is that we have 3 censuses. I'll discuss the rest of them later on. This is free to view. And like the USA census records, most of them are mixed up with Ancestry.com. And you have to pay, it's a subscription website. Now my understanding is that quite a lot of the American libraries, the Americans themselves can go into their library and download or get into Ancestry.com, so they don't have to pay for it. But it is notable that this is a free census, and that I've always thought with the 1901 and the 1910 that there should be a paywall there. Even if it was only €1, they'd have picked up 20 million quid just like that. Do you understand? So the website is www.nationalarchives.ie. And if you can't remember that, you just write in National Archives of Ireland. Okay? So that you'll get it at that. Now, the English website, just be careful, don't write in the National Archives, because the British Library, the British Archives, they call themselves the National Archives. Okay. Now, there are many censuses before. I'm just going to mention this and I'm going to go through it very quickly. I have them all listed in my book there. So a census is numbering all the people in the country. And the reason we have a census is basically we're trying to find out who is living in the country, what are the numbers like, and then we make plans where we're going to build the schools, where we're going to build the hospitals, where we're going to build the roads, where we're going to build the houses. That was also the idea many years before, but when you go back further in time, even into say the Hart Money records, which are 1776 for this diocese of Cashel and Emily, they were actually numbering Protestants, which were called the Anglican clergy and Anglicans, and then the Papists, which are the Catholics. But they didn't cover them all. A lot of people were kind of, you just wanted to find out what they were doing. So census in previous times, the petty census then, which would be 50-59, they're not real full census. They don't count all the people. Lots of people didn't want to be counted. They didn't know why they wanted to be counted. Why do you want to know my business? So they didn't, and basically then they would have sent out maybe some of their people just to pick it out, and some of those censuses only just give numbers. So the first census in Ireland was actually in 1813. The next census was 1821. 31, 41, 51, 61, 71, 81. And not one of them survived. Okay? They all survived for England and Wales. The 1813 one I don't think survives for England, but certainly the 1821 was a fantastic one. That got burned in the fire of 1922. The 1951, 61, and 71 also I think got burned in 1922. In 81 and 91 then, there was a shortage of paper during World War I. And in England they had 3 copies of these householders' sheets. So they pulled a lot of it and said there's no problem, we have 3 copies, we'll pull 2 and we left with 1. In Ireland there was only 1 copy. So that was the end of those censuses. The material census which were taken in 1841 and 1851, they were described by the Dublin Castle administration. What their idea was, we've got extracted statistics, we don't need the household returns. And again, you kind of wonder why. Now, the only thing is that with those censuses, we do actually have the numerical statistics. So we know how many people were living in Tipperary in 1821 and 1841 and 1851. We actually know how many people were over the age of 15 and under the age of 15 per townland. We know how many farmers, how many carpenters, and how many, whatever, how many females, how many males. We just don't have the actual data. So that means then the only census that we start off with for the whole of the country is 1901, and this is just a picture of it here. The next census then is 1911, and the following census is 1926, which has just been released. Now, because the British administration, and because of sensitivity with some of the censuses, and particularly some of the language, there was a decision made that they would release it every 100 years. But because we had no censuses, they released the 1901 and the 1911 census way back in the late 80s or so. And then they digitalised it then between 2007 and 2010. What that means is that you can now look on the computer at the census. What I had to do when I was mad enough, and you have to be kind of mad, I had to go up to Dublin, I had to know what the barony was, I had to know what the civil parish was, and I had to know what the townland was. And then I had to search through a whole load of indexes to help me find it. It was it was like searching for a needle in a haystack, and I did it. But now, but by 2007, and I can give another talk about that sometime, there was a revolution with computers particularly. And genealogical material or any kind of records are very suited to computers. You can put in the data and then you can put it into a database and then you can actually use a keyword search. But before 2007, and I was in the middle of doing my PhD, you couldn't do that. So that meant I had to go up on the bus to Dublin, I had to stay overnight, I'd photocopy everything at 50 pence a page. And one time one fella said to me, one of the porters in the National Library, said, have you enough money for the bus? And I mean, he was right, I was spending so much money on photocopying. But by the end of the PhD, or in the middle of the PhD, suddenly I was able to download material, and most of it was free. And it was so again, that might change. So the 1901 and 1911, I think one of them was digitalised, and Canada got involved and helped to contribute quite a bit of information. And this is for the whole of the 32 counties of the island of Ireland, because the whole 32 counties were under British administration, right? Now, I just mentioned them as well. So what happened was, is anyone here a Mormon? No, okay. The Mormons are an American, Mormonism is an American religion. And they're mostly based in Utah, and their capital of their state is called Salt Lake City. And they're very interested in genealogy, hugely interested. And they want to baptize all their ancestors as Mormons, so they will be saved. So they go back 7 generations. So that meant in the 1950s, and it's continuing, they have scoured the countryside of Ireland and Britain and America all across the world and have collected every genealogical material that you can possibly get. And they have a Mormon centre over in Limerick, and you can actually download some of it from there. So in the 1950s, Ireland had very little money. And so what the Mormons did was they took the original paper census of the 1901 and they put it on a thing called microfilm. Now, microfilm is like a tape where there's photographs put on the microfilm. And when they went to digitalise the 1901 census, they used the black and white microfilms, which I have used. And again, it's very complicated. You might want one name. You have to go every single page in case the name, you don't know where the name is. There's no keyword search to go through the whole thing. And I've done that, I've done my penance in that for years, particularly with newspapers. But anyway, they're maintaining now that the 1926 census is not taken from the microfilms, that is more clarity and it's easier to see. But the microfilms, luckily the Mormons did do it. They gave a copy to the National Library, they took their copy then back to Utah, and then the Archbishop, who had a bit of a problem with at the time of this diocese, he actually closed the National Library and closed access to a lot of material, particularly parish registers, but it actually didn't matter because the Mormons had all the parish registers anyway over in Utah, if I could only get over there. But anyway, the 1901 census, you don't need really to know what the barony is, and you don't need to know what the county is or anything like that. You can now just go with keyword search and find it. And in the 1901 and 1911 census, they're every 10 years. So there should have been one in 1921, but there wasn't one because of the huge trouble in Ireland at the time. So what we have in 1901, I just had to mention this now, we have the name and the surname, then we have the religion. Sorry, the religion, name and the surname here, this is choice that's happened, right? We have the religion, Roman Catholic. They can read and write. And then it talks about what their professions are. So this man is a government pensioner, so he's worked for the government. And then they're calling them students. Sometimes they call them scholars, because they're using that type of terminology. And then what they say, whether they're married or not married. And then where were they born? They only go far as the county. Now, here we have the head of the family is the man here, head of the family, wife, son, daughter, son, daughter, and then ditto, so on. Now, in the 1901 census and the 1911 census, there was a problem with ages, because the old age pension came in. And when the old age pension came in, every alderman wanted the pension, because of terrible poverty in Ireland. And the pension was €2 shillings a week. Some people went actually back and looked up the 1821 or 1851 census because they could do it at the time to prove that they were over 70. Some of them then went off and they took the page out of the National School Register to prove that they were over 70. But some of these ages are very suspect, particularly when you go to 1911, because you'll get that man there and he's 51 in 1901, and suddenly he'll be 65 in 1911. He'll be 14 years old, even though he's only 10 years gone. He'll make his age bigger, so he would qualify for the census. And in the 1926 census, they're saying that doesn't occur, that the ages are correct. But the census material in 1901 is a little bit suspect. And again, and I'll be referring about this in the 1926 census, you have to be careful of ages. Like everyone here, most of you should know, you all know your date of birth. Most of you would know your PPS number. Most of you know your numbers, which you want to do at the ATM. These people didn't need that type of information. Your age wasn't really irrelevant. It didn't matter what age you were. A lot of them didn't really know, because there was no need for it. They weren't going into the bank and had to give a date of birth. So they kind of knew they were around something, right? So just to watch the numbers. So just incidentally with the 1901 and 1911 census then, after the old age pension was brought in 1911, some people became much older than they were, by about 14 or 15 years. And then the British government did a check. And then they said, how many old 70-year-olds have we in the country? And they came up with 1.4% in Scotland, England and Wales. And they came up with 4% in Ireland. and statistically that wasn't possible, so some people had to give back the money, right? And then there was uproar. But a lot of it is poverty. There's huge poverty. These people are supporting themselves. There's huge immigration, and the immigrants then are sending back the money to support mum and dad at home as well. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that. Now, some of them then write their name down. What language do you have, Irish or English? And some people, these people here are saying they have Irish and English. This is a time when Irish is not being taught in the schools. So some people are native speakers. Sometimes in the 1901 and again in the 1911, since I'm looking at it, you can be very, very, very lucky. You can get mother and father. And then you'll get the intergenerational, you'll get mother-in-law down here, because she's living with them, because it's a number of generations. And suddenly, it happens in my own family, they were all Burkes, the mother and the father, the children, and then you had the granny. And granny was, of course, 82 or something, and suddenly when you started translating it, she was born about 1830, or 1820. Okay, so sometimes if you're lucky, because it's intergenerational, they're all living with each other in the one house. The old people and then the new couple, and you can find out things like that. Now, again with the women, you're never going to find out what their maiden name is through the census. In the 1911 census, there's extra parts of it. How many years are you married? So you can work out then what the age, when they got married, and then how many children living. Because again, infant mortality is quite big, so you may only have 6 names, but there were 8 children born, because 2 of them died. And then you cross-reference that to the births, marriages and deaths, and you also cross-reference it to the parish registers. Is that okay? So that's online at the National Archives, 1901 and 1911. And they were passed to, in England, the 1901 only came out in 2001, and the 1911 only came out in 2011. But we had them because of the destruction of records. Okay, now how did they compile the census? Well, the census material itself is generally in a newspaper format, and then they put them into a book, and there's a picture up there. The people who collected it were the Garda Síochána, and they actually were founded in 1926. So this is their first time, one of their first jobs. They had to go around from house to house and explain to people, as they do now at times, this is mandatory, this is compulsory, you don't have a choice. You have to fill in the census, and there is, it's just, you have to fill it in. And if you don't, there's going to be a fine and you're going to be brought before the court. And so census provides a statistical underpinning to plan for the future. So this census then, the other 2 censuses and all previous censuses were administered by the British state. This is the first time it's done by the Irish state, and that's what the big deal is. And it was only about 3 years after the Civil War. And the Civil War had brought the country to its knees in terms of bankruptcy. And it took quite a lot of money and time to compile the census. So this census only covers the Republic of Ireland, or what was known then as the Irish Free State. There was a similar census taken in Northern Ireland. And unfortunately for the people of Northern Ireland, it has suffered the general situation with many archives in Ireland, which is that it was housed wrongly, or it was put into damp conditions, but somehow or it's been lost. But they don't have the 1926 census, which had been administered by the Northern Ireland government at the time, by Stormont. They don't have that. So if your ancestors moved up to Northern Ireland, you say, oh, would be brilliant, and look at the 1926 census for Fermanagh or something like that, and your ancestors come from Leitrim. They're not going to be, there may be fragments, but you're not going to get it. So Northern Ireland is not included in 1901, in the 26 census, but it is included in 1901-1911. It was taken on the evening of the 18th of April. So whoever was in your house that evening, they had to write their names. So Mary Jo McCarthy came in for a chat, and she ended up staying the night. Mary Jo McCarthy wrote her name in your house. She was there for the night, and she wrote her name down as Mary Jo McCarthy, visitor. Right? She won't be listening to her own thing. We know that Packy has gone off to the US. He is a son. He's not there. He's over in America. He's left out. He's home on holiday. That's fine. He's on the debt. So whoever's there at the night, they write it all down. Sometimes people wrote it down themselves. In the 1901 and 1911, it's been pointed out that quite a few people wrote their name in Irish, which was a sign that they were being nationalistic. But this was the first time in the 1926 census that you had a chance to write it in Irish, and quite a few people did. So the release date then was 100 years exactly after it, and we noticed that there was a population drop of 5.3% from the 1911 census. But the 1911 census does cover the whole of the island. This only covers 26, and we'll discuss that in a minute. And interestingly enough, there's 1,000 people who were recorded in 1926, they're still alive today. Okay? Right. This is what the blank sheet looks like. This is what we had to fill in. I will discuss the categories in a minute. So if the people weren't able to read or write, the Gardaí would put it in. They'd write it in for them. And they put a little X. So if you find a little X in the mark, that means the person reading or writing wasn't great, and they got the person to do them, or they weren't able to fill in the census. So when you see X, his mark, which I've seen in some of my ancestors' parts, that means that it was written up for them. So that's just something else. So this is what the sheets were. Everyone got the sheet, and then the sheets were compiled into books, and then the books were eventually sent up to Dublin. And as a result then, there was 1,299 boxes of the 1926 census, with 700,000 sheets, and that meant there was 35 million pieces of data, and this all then had to be digitalised from the hard copies at the National Archives. And here's the copy. You can see the books that they were put into. And then here they are, and they're digitalising it, a special machine, and they're scanning it and digitalising it. And then they got to check had they done the photographs properly. Is that okay? And that's the Orla McBride director, and then the person with her. Okay. Now, some of this may be too small to see, I'm sorry if it is. So the statistics. So this is a picture of 1926 Ireland, agricultural Ireland, we'll say. A woman milking her cow in the middle of the field. And the cow, they tackled their cow to put a certain dispenser on the cow so the cow wouldn't kick the bucket. And they did sit with the bucket and stool. Some people in this room remember that. And the cows were usually very calm, and they'd names, and there wouldn't be that many. So it's mixed farming, so you're looking at animals, maybe 5 or 6 per farm, depending on the farm. And then you have a few cattle, and you have a few horses, and you have a few pigs. It's not just all cows, and it's not just all pigs, it's a mixed farming. But here we have the churns. Some people remember that as well, and some people don't. The creameries have come into the basis. Creamery is a centre of rural life. So that's a picture up there. So this then down here then is Grafton Street in Dublin in 1926. And again you can see you're walking up and down. First thing you notice is no cars. And now Grafton Street again is back to no cars, but there's no cars because the cars wouldn't have been that much. So it's a snapshot of a country shaped by the legacies of World War I, the War of Independence and the Civil War, and it gives the passions of immigration and also rural life. And Katrina Clare was one of the primary researchers in the National Archives, and she kept talking about the 1911 census. And she kept saying if only the people then, did they know what was facing them? The Dublin lockout, the World War I, War of Independence, Civil War, so much happened in that 14 or 15 years. Now, the population of the Irish Free State in 1926 was 2,972,451 people. It only covers the 26 counties, and the counties then are divided into a thing called electoral divisions. An electoral division is kind of a general small area of a number of parishes which are put together. 97% of the population was born in Ireland in 1926. Very few immigrants. Because who would be here, coming here anyway, because the place was very much it was losing people. It was an immigrant nation. People were leaving Ireland. And also a lot of the British had left Ireland too, particularly a lot of the military personnel. So it's very much a homogeneous society. 92.6% are Roman Catholic, 49% female, 51% male. 18% of the population say they speak Irish. Now that's including the children who are in school who are learning Irish. Irish has been brought in from 1924, it's now compulsory. That's why that number is so high. It is also including some of the Gaeltacht areas, and maybe some people are speaking it in the cities as well. Now we talked about the Northern Ireland census that they were lost, they improperly housed and archival neglect because it's written on paper and the paper disintegrated. And equally then, why was there a decrease in the population? And that has been a sort of a subject, a very hazy subject for a lot of times, that the Protestant population decreased in the 1926 census. Some of it can be explained as about 106,000 people gone. Some of it is the departure of the British Crown forces. Something which I will now list off is that there was a military barracks of 1,000 men in Nina. A military barracks just a minute. There was a military barracks then, had been a military barracks in Roscrea around 1800. It was revised, it was started off again then in 1922 and 23. Another 1,000 men, a military barracks in Templemore. No military barracks in Thurles. Another military barracks then in Tipperary town, 1,500 men, which went up to about 2,000 men. Smaller military barracks in Cashel, 200 men. Smaller military barracks in Clogheen, 200 men. 1,000 plus men down in Cahir. 1,000 plus men in Clonmel. Like that's 5,000 or 6,000 men. And a lot of them bring over their wives, and a lot of them get married to Irish women. And then you've got the RIC, a place called Kilcommon. I still can't get over it. So it was about 11 or 14 men in Kilcommon. Do we all know where Kilcommon is? Yeah. Yeah. It was about 11 men in Kilcommon, RIC. What are they doing? Yeah. Well, they're watching the pubs, they're watching the poaching, and they're watching when the pubs are open on a Sunday. And they're watching for a lot of things. But I'm just saying, there was such a huge amount of them. Okay? Now, it would also have to be clear that Tipperary was a notorious county all through the 19th century. You shivered and shook if you heard about Tipperary. Tipperary was a byword for violence. Much more violent than small places like Liverpool and Manchester. Right? This, particularly pre-famine Ireland. So that was why there were so many police stations, and there was 99 RIC stations at one station in the county Tipperary, pre-famine. And then I think it went down to 77, pre-1900. And then there were so many military barracks everywhere that you wonder how anyone was able to breathe. So if we were up in Laois and Offaly, the situation would be a little bit different. They were normal up there, right? They're not down here. But I'm just saying, all of this British forces, World War I losses then, there was a lot of people who died. 1,800 men, actually, yeah, it's 1,800. It's either 1,800 or 1,300, I think it's 1,800 men from Tipperary had joined the British Army and lost their lives. So there are 1,800 are gone then. Then there's a flu epidemic. And there was a bad flu epidemic and it hit the young. And there was about 20,000 people that died, 18 to 20,000 people that died in the flu epidemic of 1918. And if you got it, you turned all black within a few days and you died. And then, of course, huge immigration, particularly during the War of Independence, after the War of Independence and after the World War I. So all of that, and then, of course, the people who lost the Civil War, some of the Republicans felt they couldn't stay anymore, and they're all hidden off then to England and America and places like that. But there is still a Protestant population drop, and now we've got statistics that start drilling it down. Just where did they leave from, and why did they leave, and were they intimidated? There was a bit of intimidation, quite a bit of it, even around in Tipperary and in other places as well, why they actually left. But now we're getting down to, with this census, comparing it to 1901, we'll get better answers. Okay, the employment statistics I thought were very interesting from 1926, and then I'll go through how to look through the census. Half the population is employed in agriculture. There's only 4% in 1922, the last census. Quite a bit of a difference. In that then, everybody's working on the family farm. Some people have a family farm of 5 acres. Some people have a family farm of 8 acres. But I did that coming on book. There was one woman and she was saying she couldn't make a living. And I eventually found out it was only a 7-acre farm. And I kind of thought, you couldn't. Then we have the Land Commission. When you need the Land Commission records opened up. So a lot of the bigger estates were broken up and everybody wanted a bit of land. It's the only story in town. There is very little employment, which you can see there in manufacturing. It's only 14%. 6.5% of the population involved in commerce, finance and insurance. The industrial part of the country was actually up around the Belfast area. That's where the big shipyard buildings, that's where the linen factories were. That was the industrial part. You took this out, you ended up with just a purely agrarian economy, where everyone is involved in agriculture and everyone wants land. And they all want to call themselves farmers. And with the Land Commission then, 3/4 of the big estates had been broken up and had been sold off to the tenants under the various Land Acts, particularly the Willem Act of 1903. There was still a quarter of it not done before 1914. Then in 1923, Hogan brought out a Land Act and there was compulsory purchase, and generally people got 20 acres. But even at that 20 acres in the 1920s was still not enough to keep a family going. And there wasn't enough to keep them going because the farmer was working, he was all by hand, but he had 206 sons and daughters assisting the farmers, and 57 other relatives. So that's the mother-in-law and the father-in-law. They're all trying to eke out a living off maybe 20 acres of land, or less, or more. And they're all over the age of 12 years. So straight away, all these people are only going to primary school, right? Only about 5% or between 5 and 10% are going to secondary. A lot of the girls in this time would maybe go to secondary school for a while, for 1 or 2 years, and then they pull out. The boys would tend to go to 7th or 8th class. That means they're 13 or 14. A lot of them are studying Shakespeare. We had a neighbour in Halliford who was always giving out that he was learning either Macbeth or, it wasn't Macbeth, it was Hamlet, I think. He was able to quote it. What good is that doing me up on my tractor up on my hill? But he was actually learning Shakespeare. He was covering some of the secondary syllabus, whether he liked it or not, because he was never going to go to secondary. So these people are all leaving school until 14 or 15. And again, I had an ancestor, I couldn't believe it, she went off to America at 16. She was an immigrant, and she made her life there, and she came back to visit and everything else, but she went to an aunt and she eventually became a nurse down in Florida. But like the youth, she was so young to leave, but she was gone at 16. So 4% of the people were fishermen, showing that there wasn't, the fishing industry was not developed. 7% were domestic servants. I need to talk about that. There was domestic servants for the big houses, but a lot of the farmers had somebody working for them as well. And the term was called servant boy or servant girl. And what happened was that we had a hiring fair. Everything is done by hand, so you need as much hand as possible. So often they would come up, Spalpin Fánacht is a song which comes from the 19th century, and it talks about having a hiring fair in Cashel. And what would happen is they'd line up against the wall, and farmers would come along and prod them with their stick and make them turn around and look at their teeth and feel their arm, right, you'll do. And they'd take them on for a year. And the Colleen or the servant girl, she'd often live in the house, and she'd help with all of the work in the house. So the water had to be taken from the well. The water had to be heated then over the fire had to be lit. All the cooking was over the fire. Then you'd heat the water again to get more water for, say, washing the few cups and whatever. You had to do it for the laundry. You had to do it for the bathing the children. There's loads of kids. It's non-stop work. And then the servant boy is outside, and he's doing everything by hand as well, and he's hunting cattle or he's milking cows or whatever. The women tend to do the milking. I've discovered this because women's hands are much more softer, and that actually worked very well with the cows. Cows liked it, and they could get more milk out of the cow. Men's big rough hands, no, the women were very good at milking the cows. And then the women also, they made their own money from the pin money. They had the eggs. And that gave them their own money then, and when they were working on the farm then, they were entitled to a thing called a fortune, or a dowry. And there's been uproar about that dowry and where people did get it and didn't get it, and then there had to be a child produced within the year to get some of the dowry. There was a whole lot of things like that. So you'll be very surprised, sometimes people have been surprised to see in the 1901 and 1911 that we had servants. But this was the culture when everything is done by hand. Now, the interesting thing is we had 14,145 nuns and priests in the whole country, which is much bigger than the Irish Army at the time, which were the Irish Volunteers, which has gone down to 13,869. And again, in 1922, the National Army, or the Free State Army, had been increased up to 50,000. And it had been gradually, it was 50,000 in 1922 and 1923, and then they let them all go again. And again, loads of them joined because they got a uniform, they got fed, and they got money. And quite a lot were very inexperienced, and there was quite a lot of accidental shootings during the Civil War among the Free State Army themselves. Simply they were inexperienced with guns. And again, when they left, when they were let go from the army couldn't keep up paying them. There was a huge wage bill. A lot of them would have immigrated as well. But basically, we can see from this, it is a purely agrarian society. People are living in the towns and cities as well, but it's agriculture. Now, this I'm going to explain now how we... Right. This is how we're going to explain how you actually do the census. So when you go into the census, this is the opening page, they put it up here, of the census. When you go into your computer, the opening page says the story of us, and you've got two words here, search this Census 26 or search the other collections. So just for illustration's sake, I put in what the other collections are. So you can look up on the other collections. If you hit that other button, you come into the 1901, 1911 census, Dáil Éireann Collections, genealogy website, Chief Secretary of Registered Papers, sources for women history, Dublin Metropolitan Police, which would be the Dublin Police, the equivalent of the RIC, and the decade of centenary, and equally 60 million records. Right? So you will hit Census 2026. When you hit that, then you will come to a page like this. And the page will say surname, county, district, electoral division, DED, first name, townland. And you can put in whatever you want. Or you can hover over the map and pick out the county that you're doing. And there's also a help section on that page. And you click one of them, how you find people. Right, you can put in your name, you come up with nothing. What do? You scream. Well, you don't scream as well. You can put your finger on this and say, can I find a person? So the counties, see the little arrow there, all of the counties come up. And you don't need to know the electoral division. The electoral division here is more or less Borsley, and can be another name as well. But you can put in this, you can just put in a county. Now, you have to kind of narrow it down. So if you put a name like Ryan, there's Ryans everywhere in Tipperary, but there are also in other counties. So you're going to have to look up 15,000 names. Right? And unfortunately, a lot of the Ryans do have nicknames, but I don't think that's going to work on this because it's official. Now they might have written it in, you might be lucky. But so you generally, so that's what you do first of all. So you can search it by the surname, the first name, the county, or the townland. If you know the townland, you should be going great. So here we have the surname, address, age, and employment. And here I have a 1920s couple, and she's there with her little fur part. You can also search by townlands or streets. You can check the map, said that, and then check the name varieties. A lot of people get very hung up on how my name is spelled. Reimer Burke, B-O-U-R-K-E, and don't you dare say B-U-R-K-E. Look, the people in the 19th century were Irish speakers. And when they're translating their name, somebody heard Burke and they just put on B-U-R-K-E. Some people put in B-O-O-R-K-E. Some other people put in B-U-R-K-E. Sometimes it happens, and happened in my own family with Melanie and Melanie and Melanie. It was very hard, that was my mother's maiden name. My uncle didn't want to get the post from his uncle. There were two first cousins. One fella put in the E in Melanie, and the other fella left it out. It came down to that, right? You may spell it one way, and good, but it could have been spelled in different ways because it's transitioning from Irish to English, and then it depends on what sometimes the parish priest might have put it in a different way, and then it just stuck. So I wouldn't get too much upset about it. Yeah, you may spell it for the past 50 years, your name, but your ancestor may have spelled it differently. Now, there's also an increase of O's and surnames. In the 1890s, there's a Celtic revival, so a lot of people put back the O. So sometimes you get O'Ryan, or O'Fogarty, or whatever, or O'Brien. Sometimes you leave it out. Sometimes you get a name like Connor, or O'Connor, and a lot of people call them Connors. So then it becomes Connors from ever on. But then that's kind of putting in the S instead of the O. Some people get their name in Irish, and then first names and surnames could be written in Irish. So when they're written in Irish in the 1926 census, it's just because people have the chance of doing it, and they're doing that. Whereas maybe it was kind of a more nationalistic show of your politics in the 1901 and 1911. And then today's electoral districts correspond to DED. Now there are 13 categories in the 1926 census, and here I have a picture of the common type of houses, which would have been thatched houses at the time. And again, you can see the dress of the people. Some of the children wouldn't have had shoes, some of them would. Some of them only wore it for Sunday's best. A lot of them went barefoot during the summertime. So you have name and surname, you have the address. Relationship to the head of the household. So a family member, like son, stepson, daughter, whatever, and then maybe a servant or a visitor or a tutor. Okay? Birthplace. Now this is what's kind of getting interesting. In the 1901 and 1911 census, you had the county. Now they're writing down the townland. So for instance, I found my grandfather. My grandfather is from South Tipperary, he's living in a place called Kilfeacle. But he came from Hollyford. And he wrote down, the townland, Follaclug, which I knew it was. But suddenly, you're able to say, you see, people move, particularly in the 19th century, people don't always be in the same place. They move from place to place. So suddenly, when he writes down where he was born, he gives a different townland. That family may have moved to townland. And that is where this 1926 census gives help. Whereas in the 1911 and 1901 census, it gave the county. So you could have a big county. Age and sex, we talked about the age is probably the same, it's 10 years after 1911. Sex should be fine. Marital status is widow, widower, or married or single. Now, they're giving the number of years married, but now it's gone into years and months. So you're able to say, oh, she's married 10 years and 4 months. That means it's February 1914. So suddenly you have a month, and then when you go back to the marriage certificate, you're not just looking for a year, you're looking for a month. Widows and widowers, the number of stepchildren and children. Often what happened with a widower, the wife often died in childbirth. The man is left with 2 or 3 children. He has to earn the money. The wife wasn't earning any money because they're not going out to work. Does he put his children into an orphanage, or does he marry the sister? And a lot of times he marries the sister, or he marries somebody local again. And the woman takes on the child, and there's two of the blended family. Okay? Number of children alive refers to the fact that a lot of children did die at that time, particularly among the poorer classes, that they often got things like measles or influenza or whatever, and they would have died maybe as a baby. There's quite a lot of it. Now, the proficiency in the Irish language is new. Occupations then are also kind of new, and interestingly enough, for farmers, they give the acreage. They don't give the acreage in the 1901 and 1911. And then the place of employment is also kind of new, in that are you self-employed or are you employing somebody and what you're actually doing? And that's quite interesting. Now, other features then, the married women, their maiden name is not given. Now, with the institutions, there's an awful lot of institutions which have been set up by the British and then are exploded really under the Irish Free State. I'm thinking particularly of industrial schools, Magdalen laundries, hospitals, barracks, or army barracks, or RIC stations. Mental hospitals, which were known as mental asylums at the time. Okay, and workhouses. Workhouses have become the county homes. In the 1901 and 1911, they all did exist, but the people who were in there, were initiated. So if you suspected somebody, ancestor of yours, was in a mental asylum
or was in a workhouse, you wouldn't know because just given an initial. But in the 1926 census, it's quite mixed. Some places, I understand, like Ballinasloe, they actually give the name of what they called the inmates, the people who were there present. But in places like Grangegarman, which is up in Dublin, they reverted to the old style and just give the initials. But sometimes you can actually find them. And they're suggested that you look for the place if you're looking for something like that. Okay, there are 3 pages in the household survey in 1926, 1911, and sorry, that should be 1901 and 1911, with Form A and Form B and B1. We'll now discuss it. So we go back to the census and how we looked it up. So I said, okay, we're all from Borrisoleigh here, so I said we'll put down Borrisoleigh. So I said Tipperary and place of Borrisoleigh. And then it comes up. Now, this is not the full page. This is the next page. This is a screenshot of the page. So I pressed search 1926 census for Borrisoleigh, and I came up with 1,023 results. And what I came up with first of all was, I just came up with a Michael Kennedy, age 57, Tipperary, I'm not going to pronounce it right, Achboshayan, is it? Achboshayan, excuse me. Okay, and it goes through them all. And his county, surname, townland, DD, are you okay? DD, age and sex and religion. And you can have 30 names up on the page, or you can have 50, or you can have 100. So then I said, right, let's see what happens now. So I took one person. I came up with a James Kelly. So this is the page. So his surname is Kelly, first name is James, census year 26, county Tipperary, townland, I just said it's Borrisland, Chapel Street North. DED of Borrisoleigh, that's the electoral division. His age is 64, Roman Catholic, and is a widower. Now this part is kind of important. View census images. You want to look at these 3 images, right? So you click on that form. So you want the current record here, so click on that. Because I was talking to somebody recently, he couldn't manage it. And when you do it, click on the household form. This is what you'll get. You'll get an exact copy of the page from the 1901 census. And here we have James Kelly, the same information that he's the head of the household, he's 64, he's a widower, County Tipperary, he's born from Borrisoleigh, Catholic, and he's a publican. And then we've got the information here about the employment, that his own account that he's done it. So if you were out of work, you would put it in. And if you're an employee, you would put it in. And then what we also have then is whether a house is habited or uninhabited in the next forms, and then it's just a 1. Now I'm pretty sure in the 1901 and 1911 census that, I'm completely convinced of it, I just need to check. In the 1901 and 1911 it said how many, whether we could put down a 1 if the house is detached, put down a 2 if the house is slated. That information doesn't appear to be in the 1926 census. And they also said how many windows in the front of the house in the 1911 census. That doesn't come in here either, in the next form. Now the other one then is the Form B1, this is the second page of the census. So what these are the columns. So the first column here is the name of the house. Whether it is, say, number 3 Chapel Street, number 4 Chapel Street, the Presbytery Chapel Street, whatever. Number 2, this is column 2, 3 and 4. And 2, 3 and 4, you write down 1, if it's a private dwelling, that's what it says up there, then you write down here whether it is 1 is inhabited. And you can see they put down a 1 to show it is inhabited. Then it's left blank if it's uninhabited. Is that okay? Then a description of the house. And we'll see a description later on. So for instance, if it was, say the presbytery, the priest's house, or if it was the convent, that's a description. Or if it had a name, this name would go in here. The next part here then is number 9. So 6, 7 and 8 brings us, just a minute, brings us as far as here. Is that okay? So then I just split it up. Number 9 is here, the number of families in a house. And you might say, why would they do that? Sometimes people split their houses. They took in lodgers. Right, so the house you lived in, there might have been a widow woman. This happened in America with one of my ancestors. There were actually 2 families living in the house in the 1920 census in America. So that's why you only 1 family per house here. But sometimes you could have 2 or 3. Is that alright? And then you have the name of the head of the household. So James Kelly here, and this is for, just a minute now. This is for Borrisland, North Chapel Street. So I just call them out because I don't think people can see them. So James Kelly is in one house, head of the family. Then Edward P. Conway, John Harrington, William Malone, right, John Hanrahan, John Matthews, James Ryan, Bridget Hackett, James Ryan, Jeremiah Ryan, Thomas Darby, Thomas Burke, William Kent, Mary Dunn, John Tracy, and Mary Stapleton and Thomas Maher. And it all seems to be written by the one person, which I presume was the guard involved. And then what they have then is the number then, where these people refers, what number are they then on Form A? Right, so we'll go over here. What number are they on Form A? Here. The next one then is the schedule. They were given a number on the schedule. So it's to do with the statistical information. You don't need to worry about that. Then, how many males in this house? 5. How many females in the house? 6. How many in Thomas Maher's house? So Thomas Maher has 5 females in his house, 6 males including himself, 11 in the house together. And number of rooms in the house, we've got this here, 4 rooms. So here we have 11 people living in 4 rooms. Here we have 5 people belonging to John Matthews, 3 females, 5 males, sorry, 2 males, 3 females, 5 in total in 3 rooms. So you get an idea of the size of the house based on the rooms. But I haven't seen, they don't seem to indicate about the windows in the front, and they don't seem to indicate about the roof. And that would help work out a plan of what the house looked like. Is that okay? Right. Then the next Form B, again we go through it again. So it's very hard to see, so I'll write down number 1 then, just go over here. Number 1 then is the panel or the name of the house. So it'll be the number of the house or description. Number 2 then, there's 17 houses, that's why the 17 is up there, brought forward. So it's brought forward. And here we have Parochial Hall and Borrisoleigh Creamery on North Chapel Street. And then is the house, so we're going up to the next one here, if a private house is habited or not inhabited. So here, the Borrisoleigh Creamery and the Parochial Hall, the one is under uninhabited. Is that okay? Yeah. Then we have a description of the house with that in as well. Now, the next thing then, if not a private house, they crossed it out. And then they go back here, then the date that is collected, and then the number, they've just brought forward the whole lot of figures. There's 33 males in the 17 houses we called out, 33 males, 35 females, 68 altogether in the 17 houses we brought forward in 57 rooms. Is that okay? So there are the 3 forms which happened in the 1926 census that you can get information from. And then who wrote up, the enumerator was Patrick Walsh, and he wrote it up on the 4th of May. So he was the one person that wrote it all up at the end of it. So the householder filled in his form, and then he filled in, he aggregated it all together and put it through. So is everyone okay? Now, the events celebration, we're coming towards the end of this then. The events celebration in the 1926 census, because it was the first census, I think the reason why there's so much hullabaloo about it is because it was the first census done by the Irish Free State. It is the first census to come out in over 20 or 30 years. Because we had the 1901 and the 1910, and they were administered by British. But this was the Irish Free State showing its capabilities in a very civic sense. If you like, as a mature nation, being able to record what they have. So that national exhibition called The Story of Us, that is going to be held in about 14 or 15 places. So I listed ones which people might be able to go to see. I don't have the dates. So the dates, for instance, for Naas will be the 4th of July to the 28th of August, or 28th of July. So it's going to be in Naas, Waterford City, Cork City, Thurles, Navan, Tralee, Limerick, and the National Ploughing Championships. They're going to have the part there. So if you go to the National Ploughing Championships, you could go in and see it, which I thought was a really good idea. There's a new book out then called The Story of Us, which is done of independent Ireland and the 1926 census. And a number of essays are in it discussing the 1926 census, maybe from population view and the drop of Protestant population, from the farming point of view, from the children point of view, employment point of view, possibly how you compile the census. The archivists have also contributed. It's published by Irish Academic Press. Then, exploring that 1926 census, there's a conference in Dublin. No, I couldn't find out where it is, but it's on the 4th of June. And again, there's a number of talks and panels. So generally what happens is they'll have a panel discussion. and we discussed in the 1926 census and the permutations if you want to go to that. And then RTE are going to have a 2-part documentary called Come to the Census in May. And they're going to get various people, they were actually mentioned in the Sunday Independent actually. And they were saying that they'd gone to the census and they were looking at their ancestors and where they came from and where they moved. And there's also a 6-part RTE podcast series, which is going to be released in April as well. Now, that's the end of the lecture. So if there's any questions, there's no problem.
Any questions? I just want to thank Noreen so much for giving a most amazing dissertation. She has unravelled, as they say, generations of information. The data that she has in her head is just unbelievable. So I just want to thank her for all of that. It's amazing that there was, after all the ravages of famine and oppression, emigration, wars, it's amazing that there was even 2.9 billion standing in Ireland in 1926. So Noreen, thank you very, very much, and thank you all, and if we feel like a little chat, you're most welcome. And then we'll have the cup of tea. Thanks very much.